Hello and welcome to the Arctic Summer College. This is Max Grunig from the Ecologic Institute, and I welcome you to our session today with Monika Tennberg from the Arctic Center at the University of Lappland. Monika has worked on Arctic issues for many years, including on environmental security and on the negotiations to establish the Arctic Council and relations between states and indigenous peoples in the Arctic. And she's been at the Arctic Center since 2004 and is running the Sustainable Development Research Group and the Northern Political Economy team at the Arctic Center. Monika, I'm very grateful that you found time to join us here today and to present exactly on these topics that I already hinted at a little bit in the introduction. I want to say, as always, to our participants, so you can ask questions after the presentation. You're all muted by default. You can raise your hand or ask questions in the question pane, and you can also use the chat function. This is especially relevant for our panelists and organizers who can't use these first two means of asking questions, and we can then hopefully take real-time questions for Monika. And Monika, when you're ready, you can start the presentation. We can see the slides already, but they're not in presenter mode yet. So if you go into the slideshow mode, that's perfect. I'll mute myself and disappear for a moment. I'll come back later for the discussion part. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction and also for the opportunity to share some thoughts about the AACA process, and especially from the sort of the European Arctic part of it. I'm not going to present any official AMAP presentation. What we did was a very comprehensive and huge work, but I have picked up some points, some general points about the process, and then what we found out in our assessment work, and a little bit of a discussion about the relationship between adaptation, governance, and knowledge. So maybe you are aware of this Arctic Council project. It is sort of a next stage from the previous work that has been done in the Arctic Council about climate change. And there was a long time of preparatory work. There were 2 reports done by the Arctic Council, published around 2012, considering if such a new report was needed about adaptation actions. And finally, in 2012, they made this decision that, yes, yet another report is needed, and the task was given to AMAP. And I hope you can see on my slide, the mandate to produce information to assist local decision makers and stakeholders to develop adaptation tools and strategies to tackle with climate change and other pertinent environmental stressors. That was the task that we were given. And this was supposed to be a pilot project, and 3 areas were identified to do this pilot project. In addition to the European Arctic Barents area, there was 2 other projects taking place at the same time, in the Bering-Chukchi area and then in the Davis Strait Baffin Island area as well. And originally the idea was that we would do quite similar projects and assessment projects in all 3 areas, but then you can see from the final products that actually they are quite different. And the idea was also in our assessment work to rely heavily on the previous Arctic Council work on climate change adaptation and other relevant issues as well as ongoing projects at that time, SWIPA and Econor. SWIPA was, I think, seawater permafrost in the Arctic, and Econor was about economy of the North. And you can find all the documents, the overview reports and the assessment reports now on AMAP website. So what we did for the Barents Euro-Arctic area was this report, short introduction, sort of general chapters about local and regional knowledges and adaptation, description of the region, then chapters on drivers of change, future narratives, consequences of change, resilience, adaptation options, indigenous perspectives, and synthesis. And we did also a summary for decision makers, which has been now published as an overview report. I have written there or marked with bold letters those ones that we had stakeholder activities, try to somehow connect with local peoples, local livelihoods, to know what they thought about the future of the Arctic. So in chapter 2, chapter 5, and chapter 9, there was various kinds of stakeholder workshop activity. So what I think what we did was that it was a very multidisciplinary project, because we wanted to produce very comprehensive assessment knowledge, include environmental, climatic, socioeconomic changes, their relations to each other, their combined impacts and consequences, then to talk about adaptation and especially adaptive capacity and resilience, and then find some relevant points for people who decide on these and develop governance or adaptation options for governance. And for the Barents work, we had 180 researchers from different parts of Barents region contributing, mostly from Norway, Sweden, and Finland, and Russia. And as I said, we organized several workshops and tried our best to have stakeholders involved. It was, one must say, very demanding project because of this complexity and its comprehensiveness. Even if we were dealing with the only sort of a rather small area in the Arctic whole. We had rather limited Russian participation due to funding issues, mostly natural scientists, and it was a little bit uneven participation due to the funding arrangements. In these kind of activities, I think it's the normal practice in the Arctic Council that it's very much dependent on national funding. So therefore, it was not so sort of ideal participation. In the beginning, we were striving to get some kind of common conceptual approach for the whole report, but we're not able to do that. And that's why our report looks like the way it looks like right now. And the main confusion, one of the things that we discussed all the time during the process was that for whom we are doing this report. What is the audience, the target audience, and what are the messages for this audience that we want to present? And because this was an Arctic Council project, an AMAP project, so we were supposed to produce something useful for Arctic Council and AMAP, but at the same time, as you saw from the mandate, we were also supposed to do something useful and interesting for the local decision makers to help their work. And it was a continuous tension to that. And the original idea was to get after these 3 regional sub-regional reports, to do one big report, sort of a pan-Arctic synthesis. But as far as I know, we are not at least at the moment doing it. Maybe it will come later. So that's sort of like giving you the context of what we did. So a little bit results from the report. And one of the challenges that we had to tackle in this case was
just Monika, one question that came up in the meantime, because we're still seeing the first slide of the slideshow. If you're meant to go into the slideshow, because we still see the cover slide only. Yeah.
Okay, sorry for that, because on my computer I have managed to change the.
Now we see it. Now we see the slides.
Yeah. And now my arrows do not work. Oh, I wonder what is that. Show screen.
Yeah, so we see your presentation, but it seems to be not to be in full screen mode. And does it work maybe with the cursors or with the keyboard?
Let's see if it works now. I'm sorry about that.
No problem at all. So it's as it's always is. Now it looks like it's the full screen. So try if the slides go back and forth.
No, there's no movement.
There's no movement. So it's very funny because in the trial, of course, everything worked very nicely. And
that's typical.
That's just like in any. Well, you can also just scroll through the slides in the non-presenter mode. At least we can see that then. If you just use that, it's totally fine too.
Sorry, I didn't understand what you said.
Oh, if you just scroll through the slides in the non-presenter mode, that's also an option. Then we can at least see the slides. It's not maybe visually perfect, but it's at least conveys the same information, and we can certainly imagine the rest away.
Okay.
So if you just close the slideshow and then just go to any of the slides you want to continue, or if you want to show us the slides that maybe we missed so far, because so far we've really seen only slide number 1, and then
Sorry, here is Tuuli. I will speak now a bit Finnish if it's okay to you. Tuuli yliopistolta, hei. Mä mietin tuossa, että jos se äskeinen näkymä, mikä sinulla oli, niin tosiaan niin kuin Max ehdotti, niin ihan siinä, jos menet takaisin siihen esitykseen, niin jos toi hiiri on hukassa, niin sitten ihan niin kuin enterillä meneekö ne eteenpäin tai sitten nuolinäppäimille, jos ne on siinä.
Okei, kokeillaanpa.
Jos menet ihan siihen perusesitykseen.
Joo, täällä on mun päässä vissiin joku ongelma, koska täällä ei tapahdu mitään. Okei. Nyt?
Nyt ei näy mitään. Nyt tuli esitys esille. Ja ihan tässä näkymässä saatko tuolta vasemmasta laidasta nuolella otettua sitten jonkun slaidin.
Joo.
Nyt näkyy ainakin täällä.
Can you see now?
Yes, we can. It works. Perfect.
So I will try the presentation mode and let's go back if that doesn't work.
That's good. Very good.
So now, is it okay with you?
Yes.
Good. So this was the first slide about the AACA mandate. And thank you, Tuuli, for your help. And this was our report. the content, the chapters, which I felt was important from the perspective of my topic today, the knowledge, and the question of what kind of knowledge, and then our accomplishments and limitations. And this is the map of the Barents area, and it is a very particular area in the context of the Arctic as a whole. It is the most populated, it has the most industries, economic activities, it is quite developed area, and economically very diversified. We have reindeer herding, forestry, agriculture, fisheries, mining, and tourism. And because of this complexity, there are multiple land use pressures and competition between different land users. And we have, in this area, we have the Nordic countries, Norway, Sweden, and Finland, and big chunk of Russian territory. And these regions and countries have different political administrative systems, which of course is an issue for developing adaptation governance. And also development as a whole in this area are very natural resources dependent. And another big dependence is that this is a very internationally dependent area. Trade, politics, and security. Things happening in European politics or EU-Russian politics all affect this area. And you may notice that this is not the usual Barents map or area we have here. For the purposes of the assessment, a bigger chunk of Russian territory was included into the assessment. Unfortunately, we didn't have a larger part of Russian experts to tell about that region, but anyway, there was this wish to extend the assessment area to a larger part of Russia. And the whole motivation for this work was that something new is happening in the Arctic. We will have fundamental changes, and despite mitigation efforts, something will change for good. And it's a mix of both threats and risk and dangers, but also new opportunities and ways to do things better than before. And one of the big things, and what is, I think, the main message of this whole exercise is that one cannot look or approach climate change just as an environmental issue, but you have to put it in the societal economic context and look at it and its importance in connection to other changes that are taking place. And this probably is a list of things that we are expecting in the Barents area about climate change and environmental changes. And I don't think there is nothing very drastic new here. These are things that have been discussed. And this is the nature of assessment work that we did, that we are not doing new research. We were trying to combine all the existing research and results. So changes in the snow cover extent, snow season changes, precipitation. Barents Sea is expected to become the first ice-free Arctic region. The ice-associated species will be negatively affected. Many boreal, marine, and terrestrial species will shift northwards, and alien species is a growing threat. But what we wanted to look at is also the sort of the socioeconomic changes that can be expected in the future. And this is, I think, one of the most important sentences in the whole report, that climate change is not the only or most salient driver of change in the Barents area. So the human-induced socioeconomic, political, and other changes are also important. And if I think what is a little bit new in this report is not only saying that about these land use pressures and competition, but there's this expectation that in the future there will be changing nature of conflicts. So the report, the timeline of the report was we wanted to say something about things that happened by 2030 and try to say also something that would happen by 2080. 2030 was relatively easy, but anything beyond that, anything closer to 2080 was really, really difficult. But anyway, we looking at the global trends of change like population, economic development, technological development, demand for natural resources, energy, and the level of international cooperation and conflict will also have impacts of what kind of conflicts we can have in the region in the future. And another, I guess I'm repeating here, but I think it's a really important point thinking about the Barents area, is that it is a very international and internationally dependent area, and its development intertwines with social and other changes across the world. And how that happens is through trade and investment, migration, governance systems, spread of knowledge and ideas. And as the countries, Nordic countries especially, are very internationally connected, the national politics in the region are increasingly interlinked with the development of international governance frameworks. And that's, of course, the case for the climate change, climate cooperation, and so forth. So what did we find in terms of consequences of changes? And here's a long list of different kinds of activities that we looked. In the case of mining industry, already we know that because of the precipitation, the hydrological conditions and water management is a critical issue in the future, already now, but also in the future for mining industry. So that's something that the companies and authorities have to think about in the future when we will probably have more precipitation, how to deal with the water management in mines. But otherwise, the most important changes relate to increasing demand for raw materials and global market price developments. Forestry, what we expect is that in wintertime the harvesting will be more difficult and also a danger, or at least a fear, that there will be forest damages by pests and diseases, even if the forest will grow faster and there will be maybe a longer season of growth. In agriculture, there are hopes that there will be new crops, but on the other hand, the changing winter conditions, shorter winter and more maybe precipitation in the wintertime will maybe cause the winter damages for the fields. In marine activities, this has been discussed already a long time, that the fisheries may change due to the fish distribution, and probably there will be more large-scale fisheries than small-scale fishing in the future, due to the fact that maybe the most commercially important fish stocks might be further in the ocean, that they need larger fishing fleets to catch them. Tourism, there has been already a long time work at least in the Finnish tourism business to take into account the changing environmental conditions, and that work is continuing. The lack of snow, so the winter tourism has to change its nature, that it's not so dependent on existence of snow and ice, and try to create more attractive options for the summer tourism to develop. For the reindeer husbandry, it is the fragmentation of pastures and all the other changes that are taking place. So it's one of the most vulnerable areas of economic activities in the area, and these changing weather conditions, unstable and unpredictable weather conditions, even make it harder for the reindeer herders. We also looked at the critical infrastructure and also public health concerns. So how do you do with this, all these changes, different countries, different levels of activities, and huge number of different kinds of stakeholders involved, local companies, international companies. You have different kinds of governments and regulations and economic sectors. That is really a challenge, and governing in general is becoming harder and more difficult, and including adaptation. And I now want to jump to a little bit of an example of extreme weather events. What kind of things we need to deal in practice. And there's not that much about extreme weather events in the AACA report, except that they are very hard to predict. They are the unknowns of the future that we have to deal with. But we are talking about storms and floods and heat waves, and they can be quite harmful. And actually in Finland, we have had very strange year in terms of weather conditions and extreme weather events. In January this year, in northeastern part of Finland, in Kainuu, as an example of one of the regions that suffered heavy snowing in December and January, and there were more than 6,000 households in trouble. They lost their sources of electricity, so that led problems to heating, lighting, and communications. And the origin of the problem is that we have electric wires and the trees close by, and when the snow piles up on the branches of the trees, they fell on these electric wires, and then the service is cut. So that had continued quite a long time. So they had to actually employ the municipality, Red Cross, and even army to help the people in trouble. And of course, this is something that ordinary people cannot do themselves. They have to be electricians and technicians and all sorts of professionals dealing with these situations. And there's an assessment that this situation led to a cost of about 5 million euros to the company. So what kind of knowledge are we talking about in this kind of event? And in this collection of pictures, I'm trying to capture the different dimensions here. We are talking about, of course, weather service and warning systems and monitoring systems, company systems and their customer services, giving advice and finding the professionals to do the work. We talk about farms and their cattle in problems because of the lack of supply, various kinds of machinery needed to deal with the snow situation, people tackling with the problem on their own, going to find water somewhere, plowing the snow, forest workers going to cut the trees, and even emergency services involved taking people, especially elderly people, to better conditions. That's one example of what kind of things we might encounter in the future more, and how complicated, and also so what kind of knowledges we need. There's of course the scientific meteorological knowledge, but also we need engineering knowledge, how to deal with the emergency situations, very kind of practical knowledge of people living in remote areas, how to deal with these kinds of situations, and so forth. And quite a recent example from the heat wave in Lappland, that also was apparently everywhere else in Europe. We had record warm months, July month here, the highest highest temperatures in the recorded time. And the problem was also that we had very warm nights, so there was no no nice time of cool and so forth, and it continued more than a month. Of course, it led to droughts, which is a problem to the agriculture. Elderly people were suffering, animal welfare concerns, and this is actually a picture from our main beach in Rovaniemi, and you can see the reindeer coming to the river valley to cool off by the river, and they occupied our main beach there. And I was thinking also what kind of knowledge you need to and expertise you need to adapt to this kind of situations, to find cool places to sleep, retreat to hotels and spas to find some cool places. The electricity bills are probably very high for many households because people are trying to find air conditioning, water, ice cubes. And also it's been in a few years very fashionable, at least in, I guess, in all Nordic countries, to build houses with great big windows. But in these heat wave conditions, there's not a very good idea. So how to cool those places and keep the sun out of it is a very practical problem. And a very Finnish problem is that men, alcohol and water is not a good combination. We have had 55 people died in summer because they have been swimming or out on the lakes or sea with boats, and combined with alcohol. Out of these 55 people, 46 were men, and especially because of the heat wave, this has been a popular way to spend time to go to the water. So what we are doing actually when we talk about adaptation to climate change and extreme weather events, we need new technical solutions, innovations, improvements of infrastructure, innovation and entrepreneurship, product development, institutional structures improvement, new production practices and routines, and regulatory mechanisms and economic mechanisms. And with this heat wave example and also this snowstorm and electricity example, I tried to make that point across that scientific information, weather information, meteorological information is only a little piece in the whole. We need all sorts of expertise to deal with future events, and it's very concrete, practical, lay knowledge and expertise that we will need in the future to deal with these situations. So what is happening, and I'm in terms of actually concrete adaptation governance, and this is an example from Finland, but this is pretty much the same things are happening in Nordic countries. So there's a regional climate strategies made a few years ago. We have a national adaptation plan. Adaptation is a required thing in the Finnish climate law. We have the Barents Climate Action Plan. There's also EU strategy for climate change adaptation. And then the Paris Climate Agreement sets also some requirements for countries about adaptation. Much of this work is still work on the paper. It's done by administrators with some interactions with companies and other stakeholders and local and indigenous peoples. But I think it's still quite a bit just planning and making early preparations. It's not really implementation. For example, this regional climate strategy for Lappland, it's a nice piece of paper, but very little has happened in practice. And I don't think without a sort of involvement from a higher level, from higher authorities, requiring Lappland, for example, to make an assessment of the progress to implement the regional climate strategy, nothing will happen. And in the Barents area, we have have a climate action plan, and actually the message from the AACA report is that in principle the Barents region is quite well equipped to adapt. It has the resources and competencies and structures of cooperation. And if you want to look at what the Barents Climate Action Plan is all about, there is a quite nice website called climatestart.fi, where you can see what kind of activities they have. They are mostly, at the moment, collecting information about what kind of adaptation strategies, plans, and programs there are in different parts of the Barents area, and also trying to come up what would be the sort of the best practices and ways of sharing those best practices between different parties in this cooperation. But the main issue here is complacency. That means that for a moment, like when we have these winter storms with heavy snowing and breaks in the electricity or heat waves, there's a discussion about climate change and a moment of concern, but then it's forgetting, everybody forgets that. And in our AACA report, we have listed things that we think that explain this complacency, this lack of interest to deal with adaptation issues. And you can see many of them deal with knowledge. Of course, there's motivation and perceived need and other concerns and other pressing tasks, but also available relevant knowledge, lack of resources, the sort of the mismatch between national goals and guidelines compared to local concerns, unclear responsibilities and insufficient frameworks, ignoring local and traditional knowledge. And maybe more importantly, we should focus on how to activate adaptation and overcome complacency. So it's attention to the change, observations of real events, engage officials and residents, direct and contact and involvement with research, enabling institutions, livelihood, flexibility and diversification, access to knowledge, human and other resources, and long-term or short-term perspective on adaptation. And much of this, I think, especially if you think about these knowledge issues here of ideas, is about leadership. The sort of to have leadership that is on top of their task and responsibilities, not only dealing with short-term concerns, but also long-term issues. So we propose in our report that we need more easily accessible, regionally constructed and comparative knowledge in user-friendly forms. And that is the message that we got from our interactions with the local decision makers and stakeholders. This is what they want. And unfortunately, we are not there. We are not able to give regionally constructive, comparative knowledge in user-friendly forms, but maybe in the future. One element here, important point of here is that although in Arctic cooperation there's a lot of stress about indigenous knowledge, our report claims that it will not be adequate for meeting future challenges because we are dealing with unknowable situations in the future. What we more need is ways of combining different kinds of knowledges, scientific and experience-based knowledge, concrete and lay knowledge, and ways to communicate knowledge across different cultures. And that is really challenging task. And if we think about what the messages we got from our interactions with the stakeholders in various workshops, there's a feeling that our research now doesn't capture all the possible ideas and suggestions that they have, that our research is focused very much on economic issues and sectors, and is very nationally organized. So there might be some sort of black points in our knowledge of what the locals really would like to see happening. And especially in the context of the Barents region, it's very difficult to say what the locals actually want, because it's such a diverse region. There are so many different kinds of stakeholder groups, different kinds of livelihoods and ideas of what about the future. So then some ideas how to go forward from this. The report proposes that we should look at regional and local concerns. That's the starting point, and meet those knowledge needs. And this is a tough task. There are some important knowledge gaps. Still, after doing this work of trying to look at very comprehensively climatic, environmental, and socioeconomic changes, adaptation to them, we still need to do more work on how climate change will interact with other changing conditions. In terms of developing adaptation governance, there's a big black spot in our knowledge is about the benefits and costs of climate change adaptation or not adapting. So we need a lot of input from economic research and researchers to assess those costs and benefits at different levels, and for comparing successful adaptation across and within this region. And still, of course, we need to more knowledge and better knowledge about how to govern better. And one of the problems that the report identified, as I mentioned earlier, was the potential for future conflicts, that there will be more of them and their nature will change. So actually the report proposes that we need conflict resolution mechanisms and new ways to deal with conflict resolution. And to understand also, finally, I guess this is from the point of view of governance very important, that we understand how the Barents area and its developments connect to international, or so-called external sociopolitical and other factors and changes. An example here is, for example, the migration issue. So to come to a conclusion, I hope I am roughly within my time limit. The messages from the Barents AACA work were that that is quite a difficult and complicated task to talk about adaptation to these complex interrelated climatic, environmental, and socioeconomic changes. And our work was just like the beginning. Hopefully there will be in the future better organized, better funded, better resourced in terms of expertise, exercises, and to develop this knowledge. But anyway, the message is to look at climate change and its impacts in societal economic context. And as you may have noticed in my talk today, that it's very economically driven discussion, even if the benefits and costs of adaptation have not been really analyzed from an economic point of view. But the economic sectors are in the core of the analysis. But of course, there are other possible perspectives of change and impacts that we have not included. We are talking about long-term societal processes, but despite that, some things need to happen right now, and one of the main threats is the complacency, and this repeating the ideas that we have. It's a very challenging task of governing adaptation, especially if the nature and amount of conflicts will change in the future or become more. And still we need to do quite a lot of work to provide locally relevant, usable knowledge for local and regional decision makers. And that's what they really would like to have. And that would be one way to tackle this complacency, in my view. So thank you for your attention so far. And if you have any questions or comments, please. I'm here for any kinds of questions or comments.
Well, thank you very much, Monika, and just picture applause now, so you can hear them. They're muted, but it was very impressive, very interesting. I want to start because I have the privilege to ask first, to just ask you directly, if Monika, if you, oh, your video went away. If you can, of course, turn it off. That's okay. But that's great. Now stay with us a few more minutes for some questions. You mentioned complacency as a main threat. Do you have any thoughts on what can be done? I mean, you mentioned that people only react right after there is a extreme weather and then they forget again. And do you have thoughts on how to work on this part? Because it's, I think, a very, very valid challenge.
Well, it has to be, I guess, through knowledge, but it cannot be one-sided exercise. Like scientists and other experts are doing their work and producing knowledge and trying to develop their sort of understanding and ways of communicating that knowledge in a relevant way to others. But the other side has to move also, has to be understand the significance of these issues and to be interested in this knowledge. I think there's this kind of a Arctic talk going about these changes and impacts and worries, but that doesn't transform into political action and development of governance. I was just wondering about my own research that we did this report and what would I do next? What would, as a political scientist, what is the science or the sort of the research I could do next about governance? Is there anything new? And I had to say, no, there's nothing new. So there has to be some kind of a political pressure or some kind of motivation, whether it comes from a ministry that puts pressure on regional government that you need to do something, or local peoples become worried and take an issue with the local administration and local actors that something needs to happen. Usually money helps. Like in the case of the Lappland regional climate strategy, it was a process initiated by the local environmental center or regional environmental center. It was carried out by the Regional Council of Lappland, which is a development agency, and it was funded with some EU funding. So it was easy, but anyway, the Regional Council of Lappland could not say no because EU was ready to fund this activity and they could employ consultants to do the nice writing work. So it's a really tough question, and I don't know how can we find those kinds of leaders to ourselves that has this understanding of complexity of issues and things what we need to tackle with. So I'm sorry I cannot give a very optimistic answer to this. It's very sometimes quite depressing.
Oh well, yeah, but it's also good, to look at what are the constraints and where we still need to work, because obviously we still need to do a lot of work, but it's, of course, when you look at I mean, forgive me for the comparison, but if you look at a broken car, of course you can say it's depressing, but if you look closer at where the actual problems are, only then can you fix it. Maybe I shouldn't use car comparisons in an environmental webinar. So we can say a bicycle. That's also easier to fix, maybe. But really, I appreciate you being so honest and so open about this. I want to say we have a few more minutes. So if people want to ask their own questions and maybe also clarification questions about specific aspects. Brendan.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Monica, that was a fascinating presentation. I'm a colleague of Max's with the Ecologic Institute, so I want to thank you for your presentation. There was something that came up at the end, part of your lessons learned, that really struck me, and that was about this collecting or having access to locally relevant and usable knowledge. And this always kind of sparks a question in my mind that harkens back to the ideas of archives and libraries, and making this information, as you say, relevant and usable, and therefore accessible to these communities and to policymakers or even researchers who would continue this kind of work. So my question to you would be, what do you see as a potential for some sort of archive for or storage place for this kind of information? Is this something that you see being put together with other areas in the Arctic so that there's a comprehensive view, if possible, of Arctic local information? Or is this something that each community should sort of house on their own? I know that today we have amazing technology, but I don't think that's really improving access for a lot of these communities. So I'd be interested into your view on that.
Yes, what we discussed during the AACA is that in the Nordic countries, in Norway, Sweden, and Finland, we have these kinds of climate portals where you have at least nationally relevant climate information, both in mitigation, adaptation, climate education, different kinds of knowledges, and to make some kind of a, maybe at this stage, a Barents kind of portal, or even an Arctic portal that would have, it cannot be very comprehensive knowledge, but at least examples, best practices, stories that would sort of inspire and motivate people to think about these things. But of course, some people in the AAC process were very excited about this Arctic portal, kind of climate portal kind of exercise. But it's not only a question when you, like, it requires some resources and expertise to set it up, but even more resources and engagement, it needs to be continued and developed. So I don't know if at this stage in the Arctic cooperation we have resources available to do that kind of exercise. But that was discussed, and I understand your point that that these historical sources, archives, photographs, and so forth are very interesting. But I think, at least in the sort of the Finnish and Nordic context, everybody seems to be thinking about the knowledge is in the computers, is you go to the portals or these kind of internet sources and you find there everything easily. Then the question is, how can we combine these historical sources and documents and these new ways of communicating? But I am not a great friend of internet, and I don't like the Finnish way of depending on this kind of digital knowledge sharing. I think it would be most important to get people together and talk and share ideas, that you have an expert on transportation and road conditions and somebody on water management and then city authorities just sitting at the same table and discussing. I think that would be the best way forward. But how to get them together and talk beyond the sort of like their own limitations, that's another question.
Well, and that's actually perfect lead into a follow-up question that I wanted to ask you, because that's exactly my interpretation or my sort of view of this, is that these oral traditions especially, but also other methods of sharing information don't necessarily fit into the technology obsessed world that we have in a lot of countries. And so a forum like that seems perfectly suited would be something like the Arctic Circle Assembly, which, however, I was there for my very first time last year, and I am happy to go again, but it doesn't seem like it's necessarily, it seems to be losing a little bit of the focus on Arctic communities and Arctic countries and having more to do with international economics and global trade and all of these other issues as well, which might be a process of validating the Arctic region as an entity with a place at the table in international discussions, but at the same time that pushes out some of these opportunities for real exchange and sharing, information sharing among Arctic communities. And so I would be interested in what you think about the Arctic Circle Assembly and some of these other larger forums that have maybe pushed out the Arctic voices a little bit.
Yeah, first of all, I don't think these discussions have to happen under the umbrella of the Arctic. It can be national or sub-regional, northern or something like that. And it probably has to happen at different levels of responsibility and activity. So it can be a community or a city or a larger entity or companies from a region getting together and discussing. So I don't see the need to frame it in the Arctic context, especially in the political context. As you said, it's about shipping and polar bears and so forth.
Thank you. No, that's a wonderful answer. I very much appreciate it.
Great. No, I'm glad we got the conversation going so well, and I'm very sorry to say we're coming to the very last few minutes of your first hour, Monika, but I want to say I personally was very interested also in this question, how do we get, you mentioned traditional knowledge and this more scientific or digital knowledge, how we get this together, how to bridge this. And that's, of course, a huge challenge also because the different traditions of thinking or of the different methods, the different frameworks people operate in, right? So it's a real challenge. I wonder whether that also came up in the process of developing the report within the team that was working there.
Yes, we talked quite a bit about knowledge and whose knowledge and what kind of knowledge. And there was a recognized need to find new ways of communication and sharing knowledge. I think the WWF people were quite excited about this kind of practice theory inspired communities, practice communities, and other people had some other ideas, but maybe that's the task of future reports of these kind of exercises, that we come up with a proposal how to organize this.
Excellent. Great closing statement. So there's more work, so we can hopefully very soon see more research results. I imagine you're already working on the next stage in a way at the Arctic Center.
I'm doing something totally different. Waiting for the adaptation governance to move somewhere, so I have something to research. But thank you for this opportunity, and I hope a good continuation for your summer activities.
Well, thank you so much, and I hope that the temperatures will stay a little bit under 30 degrees centigrade in Lappland for the next few weeks at least. It's funny because, you know, in the winter we will all look back to the summer, but it is indeed, it's insanely hot. And I thank you for taking the time and for joining us. You're, of course, more than welcome to stay on for the next hour as well. where we will have a group discussion also with a student from the University of Lappland. So this is actually very, very good matching here. I think if you want to stay on, if you have to go because it's late already where you are, then I will say goodbye already now here, and everybody else says that too, but you can't hear them because most of them are muted. But it was a real pleasure, and hope to be in touch. And I'll hand over to Brendan to moderate part 2 of the, I would say evening, but it's not evening everywhere. So part 2 of this session. Thank you, Monika, and see you soon.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
All right, thank you, Max. And again, thank you, Monika. That was a very wonderful presentation. It's very nice because the way we've structured Arctic Summer College this year, we have different modules, and the governance module, I think, has really led us up to a point very nicely. And so that prepares us for what comes now. And so I want to take this opportunity to introduce the next hour of our programming. Max mentioned we'll have our group presentations, and there will be 3 separate presentations, all of which will, as we've done in the past, all of which will work into the broader theme of Arctic governance. You see Tuuli will be first this evening, or today, and she'll begin with the presentations. After that, we'll have Vanamali and then Diane. So Tuuli, I will hand it over to you. It looks like you're all set. Make sure you unmute yourself so that you can talk. Perfect. And now I will give you the screen. I will erase myself and pop back up should any problems arise. And then just to remind everybody, we'll do the discussion questions at the end of all 3 presentations. So Tuuli, this floor is yours.
Thank you, and hello everybody. If Monika is still there, so thank you for your presentation. The University of Lapland is today extremely well represented. I'm also from University of Lapland. My name is Tuuli Kuusamo. And as we all know, the topic today is Arctic governance, and my topic today is the Arctic Council and the rapidly changing Arctic. Let's see. This says once again, connection difficulties. Perhaps I have to do it in this way while it's totally sleeping. Well, I will start again. This worked so nicely.
I know, and I can vouch for it. It really worked really well. So let's try it one more time. Before, I should add, before. And so if you open it, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's interesting that this happens twice in one day. So maybe, and that's just a maybe, I'm not an IT expert, but it could even be that there is, that this is somewhat related because it seems to be same software in use. So let's try that.
Hopla. Let's have a
look. Looks good.
Now, yes. So last time, Dr. Heather Exner-Piro provided us a very good overview about the Arctic Council. So I will continue with the same institution, namely the Arctic Council. And I would like to point out some issues about the Arctic governance and the Arctic Council in particular, which were not mentioned last time. And we decided that our common starting point and research question is, what are the challenges facing government and non-governmental organizations in dealing with rapidly changing Arctic? My specific question is here, Why should we be concerned about the rapidly changing Arctic in the context of Arctic governance? In addition to that, I will shortly mention some interlinkages between challenges of Arctic governance, changing operating environment, science policy interplay, and advocacy work. And as you all know, the Arctic is an early warning of global climate change. The metaphor of rapidly changing Arctic is intimately linked with climate change. Yep. And why I decided then to say a couple of words about climate change while speaking about Arctic governance. Well, the Arctic is undergoing significant change, as Monika said. The metaphor, like I said myself, of rapidly changing Arctic is intimately linked with climate change. As Heather stated, the work of the Arctic Council do not concentrate only on climate change. However, climate change has a big impact on the overall operating environment of the Council. The climate change is said to be even the key driver of Arctic change, and some researchers speak even about Arctic in dramatic change narrative. Climate change is described as a threat multiplier because many changes take place simultaneously, like we heard in Monika's presentation. In the years to come, the changes will present Arctic stakeholders with a line of new challenges, as well as opportunities, as the region gradually begins to open up as a result of climate change. These challenges and opportunities framing can be traced back to Arctic ministerial declarations. The challenges and opportunities have mostly to do with balancing different interests, like environmental protection, traditional lifestyles and resource use, or global interest versus local voices. What does this all mean in our Arctic governance context? I try to point out some issues which I perceive somehow new or thought-provoking, at least for my understanding of Arctic politics. The speed of climate change is increasing. The Arctic of year, let's say 2040, will not be the same as today, and this needs to be taken into account in forward-looking institutions dealing with Arctic governance. The Arctic Ocean is expected to be ice-free as soon as in 2030s. This means during our lifetime. The dramatic consequences of climate change have altered the position of the Arctic and especially of the Arctic Council in the eyes of other international actors. The Arctic Council became visible in a total new way. On the other hand, the Arctic region has become more interesting for non-regional actors. For example, China and other non-regional states have applied for observership in the Arctic Council, which is said to be the preeminent high-level forum for Arctic issues. And this is my favorite part because I have been writing my master's thesis, which partly deals with these issues. So the next topic is awareness building and science policy interplay and knowledge generation. What was not discussed thoroughly last time was the role of Arctic Council as a cognitive forerunner in Arctic governance. Olaf Schramm Stocke has written or states that the Arctic Council has several important governance functions, like generating knowledge on environmental risks and response options, obtaining Arctic-sensitive regulations in broader international fora, etc. The Arctic Council succeeded in shaping current understanding of Arctic environment and climate change and its consequences through active science policy interplay. The Arctic Council, and especially its Arctic Monitoring and Assessment Program, AMAP, has specialized in monitoring Arctic environment and changes in Arctic conditions. This is the true additional value of the Arctic Council. The niche or advantage of the Arctic Council is to produce information of the Arctic environment and developments taking place in the Arctic region, which cannot be produced elsewhere. The Arctic Council is known for its world-class environment and climate assessments. The Arctic Council has published several State of the Arctic Environment reports, even before the highly acknowledged Arctic Climate Impact Assessment, AACA synthesis report, which was published in 2004. The AACA synthesis report is a great example that the regional and, in many parts, local level of analysis helped to highlight Indigenous experiences and hardships linked with climate change in a totally new way. And as we all know, the Arctic Council is not only a decision-making body, but it's actually a policy-shaping institution. The Arctic Council has achieved considerable success in generating policy-relevant knowledge about the Arctic and bringing Arctic issues to the attention of global society. And this is my point. Through its advocacy work, it shapes attitudes of other actors as well. The unique constellation of the Arctic Council, which combines states, permanent participant organizations, and observers, gives new opportunities to highlight Indigenous experiences in state-led negotiations. The Arctic Council is not capable to tackle, let's say, climate change or transboundary pollution alone, but it helps different stakeholders to get a better picture of the severity of the problem and especially its human and cultural impacts. This might, in turn, have a positive effect on global climate governance and mitigation efforts, because the Arctic Council is an active partner in other international fora, like the UNFCCC. This is so-called international interplay, which is a crucial part of Arctic governance. And here I have some examples. The first one is quite nice example today because Monika was presenting in this panel. This global implications of a rapidly changing Arctic is very specific case because this was the first official side event, this kind of COP meeting side event organized by the Arctic Council. And this took place last autumn. And if you want to watch the panel, you can find it if you use, for example, this link. And the second example of advocacy work is here, or actually you have here, or you can see here, two examples. This last example deals with international conventions, naming especially the Arctic region. The Arctic Council has contributed greatly to global understanding of the effects of climate change and, for example, permanent organic pollutants, POPs, and mercury pollution. The Arctic Council has provided significant input to international conventions such as the Stockholm Convention and Minamata Convention on mercury. And as you see, both conventions even name the Arctic region, which is a great example of science generation, science policy interplay, and successful advocacy work of the Arctic Council and its working groups. And now I am quiet for a while so that you can read those quotes. But here I was surprised that I was really surprised when I found that the Arctic Council was very specific case in this convention and how strong position the Arctic had and the Arctic stakeholders and actors had during those negotiations. I think that we are ready with my presentation, and should we continue with the next presentation before the questions?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. So thank you, Tuuli. Thank you very much. It's very fascinating, a good contrast, a compliment, I guess I should say, with Heather's presentation from last week. So I really think that'll lead to some interesting conversations. Vanamali, you're going to be next. Max, looks like you've already made her the presenter, which I appreciate. So, and Tuuli will, you can go ahead and shut off your camera, and we will call you back at the end of Diane's presentation, so we can do the group discussion following all of the presentations. All right, Vanamali, you're here now, which I appreciate. Are you ready? Okay, I don't hear you. Do you want to unmute yourself? There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that should be okay. It might be a little bit difficult with the audio, but I
Yes,
think that
I'll be as close as possible to my laptop, so I have a very big head probably. But can you see my screen?
Yes, the screen is up. It looks nice. Do you want to just scroll through real quickly just to make sure? Just go one slide down and yep, okay.
So
and then you go back to the start. It looks perfect. So I will erase myself and the screen is yours.
Thank you. So my name is Vanamali Tay, and I am actually talking from South Toledo, California. Even though it's nowhere near the Arctic, I'm extremely passionate about the Arctic problems, solutions, and the opportunities. So today I will talk about some, I would say, positive factors of the Arctic governments, like how it has been working out in a collaborative manner. So my topic would be based on talking about the Arctic Council and their Arctic Economic Council branch with the working groups, and then the current Finnish chairmanship and the Polar Code, and how they have all been working together to create rules for implementing that would be followed by not just Arctic member states, but any stakeholders in the Arctic. So my objectives are, I'm going to give a brief introduction of the Arctic government bodies, the members, and how are the policies being made and how they're being monitored continuously for proper implementation. So it's not set in stone. And this is the nice thing about it, that it has been a very holistic approach with the scientists and the business owners or the government and the indigenous group, and that's why it has been continuously modified to make it as a best practice possible. Also the mechanism, so not one state has the overarching powers, and the scope of creating Arctic as a land of prosperity and a viability of an economic source that could reach out to the rest of the globe. So we already have a very good overview of the Arctic cooperation or the Arctic Council. So it was the inspiration of Gorbachev when he really was inspired by the Arctic wilderness or the Arctic environment, and then Finland set the stage by creating protection of the environment in the Arctic region, and hence the Arctic Council was created in 1996. And there are 8 member states who are actually in the Arctic, and then there are observers. And even though observers do not have any voting rights, they don't make the rules or the policies, they have a significant factors in contributing to make the rules, because all the academics or businesses are placed in these countries, and they have to vouch for helping the Arctic environmental, economical, and holistic well-being. So even though they do not sign the papers, they have a significant source of knowledge base that impacts the rule-making process. And of course, there are permanent members such as the Inuit Circumpolar Council and the Sami Council, and they are the living and traditional organization. They have the local knowledge, the traditional knowledge, to kind of bring people into the real world, how things actually had been working and how that will work out for the bigger community. So the common result is very optimistic. We see that we had, the Arctic Council had signed the Cooperation Aeronautical and Maritime Research and Rescue Operation 2011. And then there was this cooperation on marine oil pollution preparedness and response in 2013. And the last year, the agreement on enhancing international Arctic scientific cooperation, which is a huge deal because now the observing nations or any country can collaborate with the stakeholders in the Arctic nations. So in 2014, to talk about the financial aspect of it, when there is money involved, then we can talk about how do we implement rules or the governance of the area. So it was created in 2014 during the Canada's chairmanship. And their overarching themes were to create business and connect businesses. So basically to improve, connect the Arctic to the world, and also improve the well-being of the Arctic population. So they want to create a strong market within the Arctic states. And in order to build that, there need to be a big infrastructure for the public to private partnership. Also create rules that are stable and predictable, and knowledge and data exchange between industry and academic, which is continuous, and hence that passing of the scientific collaboration last year, and the traditional engineers knowledge stewardship and focus on small businesses. So the local communities can also feel part of the big business. So the Arctic Economic Council strategic plan wrapped in 2019. So they want to come out as a strong organization, and they have that goal of moving forward and coming with a strong economic growth and come as a global player. And as I have put the asterisks, because when we see the practical implementable guidelines, it talks about the rules, which is the Polar Code, which has just released last year. And then we have include the local communities and business in Arctic business operation as the Arctic stewardship is, how do we include the local voice? And economic growth is we want to open Arctic in a responsible way to the rest of the world so that there could be cross-culture and cross-border economic activity. And again, it has to be based on responsible decision-making abilities with good and stable rules. So with this goal in mind, Finland has the common theme is that's similar: environmental protection, connectivity, which comes with digital as well as transportation, and hence the part I'll be talking about the marine safety and the ocean movement, and the meteorological cooperation, which is also scientific to understand what is going on in the Arctic that doesn't stay in Arctic and has an impact in the entire world. And the education is the education of the remote indigenous community in the region, as well as educating the rest of the world to understand how they're all interconnected. So the priorities of the Finnish businesses, so they actually are this common theme. They want to create an interconnected Arctic through infrastructure, coverage, shared services, synergies with other Arctic actors, and competent. You cannot build competency unless there is a sharing of research, continuous research, and implementation of that skills through businesses. So business and academia are working hand in hand, and this is why all the countries, mainly the observing nations, are contributing. And Safe Arctic. This is why we have Arctic Council has passed the Marine Safety and Response Act, and it basically, when we're doing business in a very volatile environment, there has to be a thorough assessment of inevitable risk and to be able to mitigate the risk factors by being prepared. So all these are being practiced, and to be more focused in that to the exact areas of improvements or work is the maritime transportation, communication, and IT, cable and satellite, and aviation. And with that, we are breaking down into how that infrastructure helping to build industries such as mining, tourism, fishing, and other capacity building activities. So they are interrelated, the energy and infrastructure. And this is where the rules are coming in hand, and this is where the countries are working together. So the Arctic Economic Working Group infrastructure are dealing with the maritime transportation. And basically, they are helping to create a building stronger, creating rules for bringing stronger vessels and rules, and create that connection between the industry and the research. So they want to create the navigation rules, also find out where the resources are, the natural resources are, and based on the availability of that, create sound environmental regulations and be able to transfer those goods. And at the same time, be able to have like a watch guard capacity to understand how things are working safely. And it's been an ongoing process. And the last example, the one example is that when the working group met with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Korea. And why Korea? Why don't they work with some other ethnic nations? Because this is where the connectivity actually takes in play, because Korea is coming out as a icebreaker infrastructure capacity, and their cost of building ships are still lower than Finland or other countries or Norway. That's why they are collaborating with Korea, and Korea is also an observing nation. And then the Arctic stewardship. So their goal is to provide a framework for a good business, and then that will be helpful to the indigenous community to be able to promote themselves and build their identity, and in a way to bring Arctic as a unique cultural heritage place, at the same time have all these economic environmental resources to be able to share with the rest of the non-Arctic stakeholders. So the membership aims to bring all this far and close members together. So they want to become, the Arctic Transportation Work Group wants to become the voice of the Arctic shipping operation while coping with the challenges. So there are many, many challenges before there could be a standardized rules, and that would not work for the Arctic situation, because it is very expensive to build the vessels. And then the regulations change with changing environment. The climate is not predictable, and the environment is constantly changing due to global warming. And then there are also a lot of protection within the different countries, and then how they're going to overlap on each other, or they'll harmonize with each other. And then the polar code challenge, can that be a standardized rule base for every country? And next is the energy efficiency. The International Maritime Organization wants to implement the energy efficiency in every single ships, and that would be something difficult to implement. And the Arctic Council, the protection for the marine environment. And they are also working strongly to abandon the heavy fluid or any toxin that is going into the ocean from the vessels or from docking and cleaning, and that also needs to be addressed, and have some solutions to that. So having with that on the same mindset as the United States seems to be aloof and not contributing, but quietly, as in the matter of scientific research, United States have been, it has been contributing greatly by creating safe haven for further or future researchers. For example, United States took the initiative to create a non financial or economical activity. It's called the Central Arctic Ocean. It's off limit for any commercial fisheries. Basically, we know when the countries establish their continental barrier or boundary, that the rest of the place or the area become graft for any country. They can go take their vessels and they can mine, or they can, in the water, or they can fish as much as they want. But that has an impact with the coastal communities. So it is a very good initiative by the United States, and this will buy time for the scientists to understand the changes occurring in those areas, also to the chain effect in the coastal regions. So the 2.8 million square kilometer international waters in the Arctic is not just the claim by the Arctic nation, but also the other areas in the world. And this would help to stop that ongoing operations, financial operations. And then the Polar Code. So the Polar Code is the safe design and operation for the vessels in the Arctic. So I will give a little intro to the Polar Code, the requirement, and does it make the Arctic shipping and transportation safe? So the Polar Code is actually an extension of SOLAS, which is the safety of life at sea that was established in 1978 and signed by 161 countries. So it is an existing protocol and being obeyed by 161 countries. And it is an extension. It is like a modern version. The Polar Code is a modern version of the SOLAS and MARPOL. And MARPOL is it is actually trying to stop the marine pollution. So basically, it's like an improved version of the old rules. And it actually was effective since January last year, 2017. And every single ship that would be in the water since January 2018 have to abide by the rules. And they basically existing shipping industry have SOLAS certificate. And so any cruise ships or any even scientific fleets that are going to be working in the deep Arctic, they need to have this kind of a protection from the law-abiding vessels and rules and training to be able to carry on their activities safely. So the key code requirements, basically it is very difficult at this point because the ice condition and the remoteness and high altitude, it is something extremely difficult to just keep as a standardized form. And as nobody can predict what would be the ice sheets for next few years, whether it would be, old ice or new ice or thin ice or deep ice to be able to use an icebreaker to be able to navigate. It is something difficult to envision. And this is why the research is extremely necessary. And this is why the scientists are going out there and the industries, the private sectors are coming in with the new cutting edge shipping and other kind of vessels that are adapted for the future transportation. And this is why it's an ongoing process. So the safety part would be communication through satellites, navigation by also satellite, life-saving skills, fire safety, and manpowers and train them. So we have to have enough infrastructure along the coast or other ways, helicopter or satellite connection throughout the voyage time to be able to be connected. And the environmental protection plan. So not to be able to just create like a dumpster in the middle of the ocean. So they have to have a strong protocol to stop the release of the garbage or sewage or any other nitrous-based products are coming in, mostly chemicals. And safety parts, so lifeguards and maybe army, especially the Russian is training their army to be able to part in rescue parts. So is Canada and Denmark also has a huge part in this to train their army to be able to take part in rescue missions. And the environmental protection is prescriptive, so it's an ongoing. Scientists need to continue their research to be able to prescribe what is the best way of mitigating the footprints. So does the code make the polar transportation safe? And it's still in the beta stage, and we need more. As I said, it has not been implemented. There has not been commercial shipping going on through the North Sea route or any other places. Maybe it's an experimental state, and this is the beginning. But it does make voyage more safe because there are the continuous research and also working with the local communities who have the extensive knowledge from living in that areas, the traditional knowledge, and the mindset that maybe it is not one size fit all based on the year, based on the proximity to the coastal region. So it is difficult to say, but it is something that is on place that has been signed and approved by many countries, like 161 countries, and it is a start. And it also creates awareness, like how do we create a structure of a safe infrastructure. And that would also make people think, why do we follow these rules? Because they're extremely difficult and challenging. And that's why it creates a very holistic approach, engaging the scientists, engaging the industry, the business aspect of it, and the people. And with that, I'm going to finish my presentation, and if you have questions, I'll be available now, or I can be available in the end.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Vanamali. That was a lot of information, but I really like how you broke it up into the different aspects. And I think I have a few questions about the polar code that I'm looking forward to asking. So we will do the questions and conversation following Diane's presentation. So you can go ahead, and the audio worked just perfectly. So there's no worries about that at all. Although, Diane, there's a little bit of background noise, I believe, on yours.
Oh, there is?
Yeah, I don't know what exactly that's from, but there, it's gone now. So whatever that was is.
Is that better?
Well, here, let me finish up with Vanamali first. So we'll call you back up for the conversation as soon as Diane's presentation is finished. So thank you again. And Diane, we'll turn to you. Perfect. You've already been made the presenter, so you can go ahead. Your screen is up, so you can bring your presentation up. The audio seems to be better now.
Okay, so I've taken off my headphones. So
Okay, there is a little bit of a feedback. I don't know, Max, you have a little more experience than I do with this. Do you hear this or?
Yeah, we had these problems in the trial as well. So do you want to try again with the headset and make sure it's actually plugged in? Good. I think that's better. And then you can select for the output, you have to select also the headset. So that's, I think, under audio. And then you should hear it in your speakers, and we should not have the feedback.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, but we have the problem that there's still the background noise. So if you can select for the output, just your headset.
How do I do that?
There was a pop-up just coming a second ago. You can also click under audio in this control panel. There's an audio panel, and you can go under the output. You can select the different options. Otherwise, if it's not working, you can also call in to the webinar, and we can do it over the telephone. That's the very last idea I can come up with right now. I mean, at least.
I don't know. I don't know how to change the audio or do anything like that. I apologize.
Yeah. No. Do you see the control panel for the webinar in your computer?
Yes.
And under one of the tabs shows audio, and if you click on that, on the arrow, you have the microphone options, and then underneath you have the speaker options.
Okay.
And can you select the headset over there?
I'm sorry, what?
Oh, can you select the headset as an option there? Do you have the sound on your headset right now? Or
I do have the sound. I have the sound on my headset.
Okay. Okay, is there a ventilator running or a fan or some other electric component in the room?
There's my other computer.
Yeah, that might be. Is it maybe, you can also call in. You can.
Okay, I just don't know the number. So if I switch to telephone mode, maybe it will show me the number. It doesn't show me the number. What would you like me to do? I can turn off my big computer. See if that helps.
Okay, I was just trying to read it to you. Well, if you go under audio and click on the phone call button, it will give you the number and how to dial in exactly. Sorry about the delay.
Audio phone call.
In the meantime, maybe we can already ask a question, Brendan, until, oh, I think maybe Diane is past it and we are. Let's see. Okay, so let's see. And I hope Diane dials not the number from Germany, otherwise it will be kind of a high phone bill at the end of the month.
Okay.
Hi, Diane.
Hello?
Yes,
Can you hear me?
here we are. Very good. Excellent. So here we go.
Sorry about
and
that. I thought everything was fine earlier.
So
okay.
you can show your slides. The sound is perfect, and we'll be all very quiet and let you run the show. Thank you, Diane.
Okay, let's hope my dogs will be quiet throughout this. So today what I wanted to do is I wanted to talk about the Indigenous organizations of the Arctic Council. And I just want to say I have no access to a timer, so you're going to have to let me know, when I'm getting close to the end, because I was going to use my phone as the timer. All right, so one of the things that I think is really important to understand is my perception of governance. But for me, governance is about the networks of organizations. So in order to do a thorough network analysis of what's going on in governance in the Arctic really requires a lot more time than I have in general or today. So what I thought I would focus on, given the other two presentations we heard, was the Indigenous organizations. Now, my research question is basically, who are the Indigenous actors in the Arctic Council network? And a sub-question I'm really concerned with is whether or not they're poised for cooperation or competition. My conclusion is essentially that they are going to cooperate and they're going to compete. And the reason they're going to do this is to manage the opportunities and the challenges that they've been presented with. Excuse me. So a little bit about the opportunities and challenges. We're all very familiar with the challenges that are facing all the people in the Arctic, but especially Indigenous people. Those challenges come from climate change, which presents both opportunities and challenges, comes from globalization, and comes from economic development. Those are the top three. So why would I say that there are both opportunities and challenges from some of those things? Let me give you an example. I think if you look at climate change, it certainly has created an environment that's more hospitable to tourism. And people also talk about this last chance tourism, where people are headed to the Arctic because they think it's going to disappear. So that brings in a lot of resources and money and job opportunities for the Indigenous people. But again, at the same time, the challenge is it just makes climate change worse. And I could give you examples for economic development and globalization, but I think we're all very familiar with what's going on at this point, so I don't have to do that. So one of the things that's important to understand is that the Arctic Council is really the lead organization in Arctic governance. And being the lead organization means that the centrality of power is with the Arctic Council. Now, today I want to focus on how the Indigenous organizations work with the Arctic Council, but you've already heard from Tuuli and Vanamali that The Arctic Council is successful in, shaping problem definition and policy and generating knowledge, but really the Indigenous populations or the Indigenous organizations are more like workhorses within that because they have no real authority. Okay, so we know the 6 permanent participants, and I will talk about each of those in turn very briefly. What's important to understand is that even though I call them workhorses, they have no seat at the negotiating table. They have a seat at the negotiating table, but they have no voting rights, and more importantly, they have no veto rights. Right? So they can participate in things like agenda setting. They can participate in the various committees of the Arctic Council. They have a liaison through the Arctic Council Indigenous Peoples Secretariat, or the IPS. But the reality is, all that they can do is to help set agendas. They can address the meetings. They can raise points of order in decision making, but they have no real authority. So I would say that they are semi-empowered, or if you're familiar with Sherry Arnstein's ladder of participation, I would say that they're in the mid-rungs, and they're really in the tokenism run, where they are consulted and maybe even placated, but they don't have any real authority. Now, the reality is that they play a very important role in agenda setting. They contribute substantial information, including the very important traditional knowledge, or traditional ecological knowledge, it's sometimes called. And I would say, and maybe my co-presenters might argue with me, but I would say that the Indigenous organizations lend legitimacy to the Arctic Council. So just quickly on the IPS. The IPS is a facilitator or a liaison. You have to understand that some of these organizations are quite small and they don't have a lot of funds, and they're also geographically located. So it might be quite difficult for them to be in constant contact or attend meetings and whatnot. What the IPS does is it serves as a conduit so that it makes sure that the permanent participants of the Indigenous organization have the documents and reports that they need. It helps to facilitate that their views are presented. It is an information sharing or dissemination function, and it also coordinates their participation. Now, interestingly, the Arctic Council provides funding to the Indigenous organizations, but that's funneled through the IPS. So when I said a minute ago that the Arctic Council has sort of the lead organization, if you look at just the part of the network that is the Indigenous organization, then the IPS becomes the lead organization. And again, I find that to be a little bit troubling. A lot of what I have seen is that there is just a consistent or constant era of colonialism, not just within the the Arctic nations, but within the Arctic Council. And I think that's something that has to change. So looking at the different organizations, what I began to do was I began to look at, in doing a network analysis, how you might understand the individual nodes on the network or the individual actors in the network. And so very basically, what I was trying to do is I was trying to get a sense of the scale of these organizations, what sector they might lie in, their geographic location or scale. Also, what resources do they contribute to the Arctic Council? And when you talk about resources contributed, many people talk about capital, but as you know, capital can be a lot of different things. It can be knowledge capital, it can be social capital, it doesn't have to be just financial capital. Of course, it's important to understand where they get their accountability from. and who they are accountable to. And then finally, when we talk about performance, we look at things like outputs and outcomes. Now, outputs are more like tasks, and outcomes are more like goals or long-term outcomes. What I did was I just sort of combined them for the sake of brevity. All right, so the Aleut International Association, it's unclear exactly how many people are represented, but the estimates are that it's several thousand. Some people say it's maybe just under 10,000, but it's very unclear at this point to me how many people are actually represented. This was formed in 1971, well, 1971/1972 as an Alaska Native corporation. It is a nonprofit organization that spans the Aleutian Islands between the U.S. and Russia. Now, the organization contributes information and agenda setting, and what they're really concerned with is what's going on in the Barents Sea. Okay? So their activities might be things like mapping in the Barents Sea or trying to track transboundary contaminants. Of course, they're concerned with climate change, but they're also very concerned with how the resources of the Barents Sea are being developed and who's benefiting from the development of those Barents Sea resources. If we look at the Arctic Athabascan Council, it was formed in 2000. Basically, it's an international treaty organization between the U.S. and Canada. You know, the indigenous populations don't fit neatly into the country boundaries that are in the Arctic. And that becomes very apparent when you start to look at some of these indigenous organizations. So this particular one scales the Athabascan region of the U.S. and Canada. It represents approximately 32,000 people. And again, the contribution is information and agenda setting. The Council's main goal is to promote a greater understanding of the common heritage of the Athabascan people. But in addition to that, of course, they're concerned with things like climate change and things like resource extraction. And all you have to do is remember that they can be affected by drilling in antelope, right? So they have very mixed feelings about that. Now, we heard a couple of weeks ago from a representative from the Indigenous Council International, or GCI. It's a nonprofit organization. Its geographic scale is, that's the U.S. and Canada. I apologize for that. Its geographic scale is U.S. and Canada, and it represents about 9,000 people in the Northwest Territories. Interestingly, it promotes itself as not only an information and agenda setting organization, but contributing to policy design as well. It focuses on environment, youth, economic development, and education. We heard about that a couple of weeks ago, as I said. Most people are familiar with the Inuit Circumpolar Council. Now, this was started in the Inuit Circumpolar Conference in 1997, and it formally became the ICC in 2006. So not only are most people familiar with this organization, it, I would say, is one of the leading activists of these organizations, and I'll talk about that at the end of the presentation. So as you probably know, its geographic scale is 4 countries, and it represents approximately 160,000 people. It contributes information and agenda setting, but I would also add advocacy to that. The ICC is very concerned about sustainable environmental management, but I would say more than that, it's concerned with sovereignty over natural resources. All of these organizations also, of course, want to promote the culture of the culture and language of the indigenous population. So that's part of what they all do. And if you look at some of the initial documents of the Arctic Council, that's one of the reasons why these permanent participants are permanent participants, because they provide for the active and full consultation with the Arctic's indigenous peoples, according to the Arctic Council. I should also say that, as you're probably well aware, originally the Arctic Council was formed around two key pillars. One was environmental protection, and the other was sustainable development. But that has really expanded, and I would say that's expanded thanks to these indigenous organizations, because now the Arctic Council is more concerned with things like health, education, and again, supporting the indigenous languages and culture. Right. So RIPON, or the Russian Association of Indigenous Peoples of the North, was actually formed in 1956, which, if you remember history, that's really interesting because it was formed under the Soviet Union. It's an umbrella organization or umbrella association of 34 smaller indigenous organizations. For me, the sector is unclear. I don't know because there's not that much information out there, at least not in English, about sort of the bylaws and how this organization works. The geographic scale is Russia, of course, and it represents approximately 250 to, some people say 270,000 people. Like the other organizations, it's an information and agenda setting organization. And it says, and I say that with a little bit of emphasis, the organization says it focuses on human rights, but you should know that Russia in the last year or so has declared some of its indigenous organizations as hostile entities. So it's supposed to focus on human rights, traditional knowledge, and then research about the interests and the peoples of the High North. Now, finally, it's the Sami Council, which goes back to 1956, and again, an association of 4 organizations that span Finland, Norway, Russia, and Sweden. The ultimate goal of the Sami Council is to promote a Sami nation, or I've nicknamed it here One Sami. Okay? This organization is really about the promotion of Sami rights and interests, specifically by contributing policy within the 4 nations. So it does play a role in the Arctic Council, but I think it is more concerned with trying to promote the rights of the Sami people within the 4 nations, Finland, Norway, Russia, and Sweden. It's also about education. So that's a very brief look at these organizations. Of course, I cannot do them justice in the time that's allotted, but I do want to say a couple of things. Let me just flip my notes. The permanent participants for the 6 indigenous organizations will cooperate and compete. So they will find issues that they disagree with, and that has to do a lot with resource extraction and who's going to benefit and where that extraction should take place. But more likely than not, they will cooperate. By the way, this cooperation and competition is something that you heard about last week when Andreas was talking about Russia, but it's also something that was raised in the 2014 report called the Arctic and Anthropocene that was presented by the National Research Council. So this is an ongoing theme about whether people in the Arctic will cooperate or compete. The empowerment of these organizations and the indigenous people is absolutely essential. There's even a footnote in the Ottawa Declaration that says that these organizations have no rights. So, and you've also seen other things happening in other international organizations where the sovereign countries or the colonial powers of these people have fought against their legitimacy and their being recognized as having rights. But one of the reasons why they need to be empowered is not just because it's the right thing to do and not because it's about justice or trying to break down that colonial narrative. It's also because we can learn so much from the traditional knowledge, the traditional methods and skills. So I want to make another point about empowerment. Now, a lot of people say, like, well, we need to build the capacity of the indigenous. And I take issue with that. If you understand traditional knowledge, you know that the indigenous people have so much capacity. They have a lot of skills. What they don't have is empowerment, because when they sit in the lead organization in the Arctic Governance Network, simply as people who can participate but have no voting rights, then it's clear that what we need to focus on is empowerment and not necessarily capacity building. So I think that it's critical that they have this more active role in the AC, but also in their own, within their own spheres, within their own geographic scales. And the above can be done by strengthening their part of the network. So they need to strengthen the ties between them. They need to work more closely. There's a wonderful story that the Tlingit tell about themselves, and they're known as the tree people, right? And the Tlingit talk about how you have to spread your roots far and wide. I don't know if anybody's ever seen a Sitka spruce, but the roots are spread far and wide. And the reason is because you can't stand alone. You have to have somebody to catch you when you fall and somebody to support you so that you can grow taller. What does that take? Well, I think that's going to take things like focusing on sovereignty and decision making. I think that's going to take a continued focus on culture, but I also think that's going to take institutionalizing their power. And by the way, those are the three things that the Harvard Project on American Indian Economic Development came up with in studying the American Indians. So let me circle back to something that the ICC has really been a lead organization in trying to promote, but other organizations have been part of this. In 2017, at the Circumpolar Inuit Economic Summit, which was essentially driven by the ICC, I don't know if anybody read about this, but they came away with an idea to create a pan-Arctic indigenous organization. Right? Now, there are some pan-Arctic agreements in terms of marine sustainability. There are some pan-Arctic wings of things like the World Meteorological Organization, but there's no pan-Arctic indigenous organization that's like the Arctic Council. So you can imagine that there'll be pushback from the Arctic Council if this pan-Arctic organization can ever get off the ground. But the reality is, even though they want to form this organization based on the principles of the Alaska Native Corporation, I think we're a long way off. So without having any knowledge of what time it is, I'm going to stop my presentation there, and I'm going to let the moderators take control again.
Thank you very much, Diane. And I really appreciate your flexibility in calling in. That worked out very, very well. So we were able to hear your voice, and it worked nicely to have both the computer and the phone there. I will have to say, unfortunately, because of our little issues, I don't think we're going to have time to have a discussion today, because we are just past our time. And so I think the best thing, Max, you might want to jump in order to respect everybody's schedules for the day. I think it's probably more appropriate for us to hold on to our questions, perhaps exchange them among ourselves, and hope that maybe we will have a little bit more time next week even to follow up on any ideas or thoughts that people had. I just want to say, specifically with Tuuli, Vanamali, and Diane, it was really fascinating to have these different aspects of governance addressed. And I think what you all did very nicely, even though Heather gave us a very comprehensive introduction, at least to the Arctic Council last week, and there was quite a bit of talk about the Arctic Council. I felt like these were very different, very new approaches. So I very much appreciate the way that they looked, that you all looked at them, and I look forward to having some conversation in the coming weeks. We do have 2 weeks left. Next week, of course, we'll begin with our social sciences, which is a very broad topic, but that's half the fun of it when it comes to studying the Arctic. So we'll have 2 speakers next week from outside, and then of course our final group presentation in 2 weeks' time. So thank you especially to the 3 presenters from Arctic Summer College group this year. I thought that was very interesting, and I will be looking forward to further conversation. Max, thank you. Did you have anything you wanted to say before we depart?
No, just hoping next week we get a better grip on technology. Sometimes just happens. I'm glad that we all managed to work this out in the end. And yes, we can't take questions now, but at least everybody got to speak and we could hear everybody. I'm glad it worked.
And I appreciate everybody's willingness to stay on a little bit longer so that we can close up this week. Have a great week. Again, if you are a part of the next group, go ahead and email us and we can start to work out details for your presentation. Thanks again. Have a good week. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.